Join us for an interview with Sabrina Fitzgerald, national leader with PwC Private, whose specialty is working with families to help them navigate the unique challenges and opportunities of multi-generational family businesses, a segment that comprises 90% of all businesses in North America. Now, let's meet the remarkable Sabrina.
And I think that's why I actually found my way back to public practice, and why our team at PwC loves what they do, is because we help businesses in a time where maybe they're too close to it. So we can stay objective. We can look at the pros and cons, the black, the white. We don't necessarily have the emotional tie to the decision making, and we can make an objective, sound suggestion or recommendation for our businesses and help them select their path forward.
All right, let's get into this. So when you think of economic drivers of growth, what do you think of? Do you think entrepreneurship, productivity, trade? Maybe all of those things come to mind. But do you ever think about the significance of family-owned businesses? This major yet inconspicuous sector is actually the backbone of most Western economies. And it's actually undeniable. The economy loves family-owned businesses. They contribute almost 65% of our GDP, the same percentage again in employment, and the community loves them too, with a report from the Harvard Business School suggesting that 60% of consumers prefer to buy from family businesses. But running a family business is no easy feat, especially when business problems become intertwined with family values and generational differences. And just like starting any company, the early odds of success can be daunting. Family businesses, like all startups, have failure rates reaching as high as 70%. And even though estimates suggest almost $9 trillion will be passed down to Gen X and millennials within a decade through family businesses, the icky research shows that 70% of families lose their wealth by the second generation and 90% lose it by the third, meaning there's a need to ensure a smooth wealth transfer between the leaving generation and the new generation that will be taking over. So whether through a lack of trust, a failure to prepare heirs, or a misaligned vision of the purpose of the wealth, whatever the reason, a lack of alignment can put a lifetime of hard work at risk. And that's where this week's guest comes in. Sabrina Fitzgerald helps family businesses develop a game plan to ensure that legacies can be maintained and built on for years to come. In this interview, we talked to Sabrina about how a family background in business eventually led to a move from being an accountant specializing in tax planning to working with a single family on their major retail business, and eventually a full-time commitment in PwC, one of the world's great consultancies, helping families stay at the center of successful business. Now, let's meet Sabrina. So I'm very excited today to introduce Sabrina Fitzgerald, who is a managing partner and national leader focusing on family businesses within renowned consulting group PwC. I'd like to welcome you, Sabrina. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Robert. Happy to be here.
So I was so keen to talk to you because, we all know that small business is the backbone of the economy, and the majority of those businesses are family businesses. And I think for a lot of people, that might be surprising to some. And what I always find curious is that if you have ever, been to a Christmas meal with your family, you know how fraught it can be. And when you start to mix money and family, it can become even more complicated. So I'm really interested, first of all, somebody, doing what you do, like what exactly is the day-to-day of your job in working with family companies?
Well, it's interesting because it's evolved over time. I started working with families very early on in my career as part of a family business myself. So my mom and dad had franchises, and I worked with the family business in a much different capacity, really doing exactly what mom and dad needed me to do at the time. I didn't have much say. That was even when I was a teenager. But over time, I became an accountant, CPA, CA, moved into tax planning. And so now my real focus when I work with families is around getting the wealth to the next generation adequately, tax efficiently, and making sure that next generation is, let's say, emotionally ready for the transfer, as well as the leading generation. A lot of times we focus on, is the next gen ready for the business? But it's actually, is the leading generation ready to let go of the business.
Oh, gosh, I can
And so
imagine.
that's my day-to-day.
I can imagine. I'm curious, though, finding out that it makes sense to me that your background is an accountant, because obviously, canning the beans is such a big part of business. But I'm curious to find out that you grew up in an entrepreneurial family, and I'm wondering, did that bug of entrepreneurship never make you think that you'd like to start a business, or was it in fact the experience of doing that made you say, you know what, I'll work with others, but I'm not doing this myself?
You know what? It's so funny. So I definitely have the entrepreneurial bug. My husband has his own business, so I feel like somehow I live vicariously through him and his grumblings. But with my family business, I knew that it was important to go to university and to get an education. And although I thought I was going to end up majoring in something more like marketing and sales, I ended up in accounting and loved it. But when I got into the accounting world, I was the auditor and I'm like not loving it. Mm-hmm. So what I quickly did was I did like a short stint in tax planning around this time of year. Of course, it's springtime always brings tax planning and tax returns that are due. And so I was 22 years old out of university doing tax work. But if I called a client, they answered the phone because it mattered to them, right? How much tax that they owed personally. And then carry on into May, June, that tends to be when corporate tax filings are due. And corporations that are paying tax, that also matters to the owner. And so therefore, I'd always get an answer when I make a phone call. So I quickly knew that working in tax to me was way more satisfying than working in auditing. Not to say that the auditors out there in my world are not living an exciting life. It might be for them. But what I actually thought was, okay, I'll get all this experience and go back out on my own. And I did a little bit of that. It was a short stint. I went out into industry for about 6 years, and I went into a business that my father was working with a U.S. family. And this U.S. family had this desire to come to Canada. Very large family business in the U.S. Needed mind and management in Canada to really make it lift. And so my father and I got together and started this project in Canada. We set up shop. We set up basically an industrial section, a retail store, and an online presence. So we had a whole lot going on. I learned a ton from my father. And after about 1.5 years, he said, okay, it's my retirement time, so you can carry on. And I carried on, and I did that with this family for, another several years. Loved my time, but what I missed was actually dealing with multiple families and helping them in their business growth and their business trajectory. And that's how I found my way back to the firm that I started with.
So I've got to imagine it's half psychology and half accounting.
Well, it's hardly any accounting at all, to be totally honest, right?
Or certainly financial, looking at the financial side of it.
But even then, like I find our family businesses and our private businesses in general in Canada, they want an advisor who, yes, can help with their accounting and their finances, with their financial statements and tax returns. They more than that want a trusted business advisor. They want someone that they can turn to, that they can sort of ask any question. I'm thinking strategically of X, Y, or Z, and what do you think? And they want someone who could sort of think on their feet, be there as a business partner. It's definitely a bit of the psychology side comes out a little bit. And I actually found myself, it was in, 2015 or so, I went back to school. I'd been doing so much work with families and family businesses that I went back to school and did a designation called FEA. So it's the Family Enterprise Advisor. And the reason why I did that is because, exactly to your point on the psychology of business and family business in particular, there is a lot of emotion tied to the founder when they start a business, or to any generation if they've taken it over from another gen. And that's because business is personal, right? They're building a legacy. They're not just building a business. They're thinking of, I've got all my eggs in one basket. And if it's mom and dad and then the kids that get involved, it's like the entire family legacy is at risk if something goes wrong. And so there is a lot of emotion, and sort of weaving through that was an important criteria for me to be a more successful advisor. And that's why I found my way back to sort of doing that. I don't want to call it a soft skill, but it really was like shoring up. I have deep technical expertise in tax planning, but like shoring up that emotional side, the psychological side of business.
And the other element I would think that is absolutely critical for what you do for families is just remain objective.
Yes, well, of course, right? And I think that's why I actually found my way back to public practice, and why our team at PwC loves what they do, is because we help businesses in a time where maybe they're too close to it. So we can stay objective. We can look at the pros and cons, the black, the white. We don't necessarily have the emotional tie to the decision making, and we can make an objective, sound suggestion or recommendation for our businesses, and help them select their path forward.
So how does how does a business typically become a family business? Like, what's the first step that is normally the trigger that causes a business to go from just a business to a family business?
Well, it's funny because there's a lot of businesses that have family members within the business that wouldn't consider themselves a family business.
Right.
So I think that definition isn't something that is written. It is something that is felt. So some families recognize that they are, that they have, like, say, a familyness advantage, that we are a family, we're operating this business, and the familyness is our advantage. Could also be a disadvantage in some cases.
Sure.
And then there's other businesses that might have their kids involved in the business, but never really seem to want to take it over or to do anything more than their role in the business, perhaps almost more acting like an employee rather than a family member who's growing the legacy. And so I think it's difficult to define when does that pivot happen from here to there. It's really up to the families whether or not they see themselves as this is, yes, a family business or not. But typically our definition would be if there's more than one member within the same family, blood relatives, let's say, within the business, that it's considered a family business. But in many cases, Robert, to be totally honest, often partnerships, and we see this a lot in the tech ecosystem where they've grown up together, friends, they act a lot like families like a family business, because they are like a family to themselves and they don't want to let each other down in the business growth. So it's interesting, right, because it just depends on how tight they are, really.
That is such an interesting observation, because when I started a venture back in the mid 90s, and my two, there was a group of 4 companies eventually, and there was 8 partners, but 3 of us were founding partners across all of the businesses, and they were siblings to me. They weren't just my business partners, so that's such an interesting observation. I suppose, though, that there must be a distinction between somebody who works in the business versus somebody who has a level of managerial or director level say in a business, in which, you might have multiple family members who can influence the direction of a business. So that must be a dimension to what would constitute a family business.
Absolutely. Like, one of the first things we do when we work with a business is we draw out the 3-circle model. I don't know if you've seen this framework before, but it's globally recognized. It's effectively one circle. Think of a Venn diagram. So I'm going to intersect all of these circles. So one circle is family, one circle is ownership, and one circle is business. Sorry, I've got my dog next to me. That's my family. My dog is on the bed. I don't know if you can hear them, but they're sitting there playing around. So yeah, there's the Venn diagram: family, ownership, and business. And if you think of how you play, am I a family member that's just sitting on the outside of the ownership and the business circle? Am I an owner that also is family and working in the business? Then I sit right in the center at the intersection point. If I am an owner but not a family member and I work in the business, I then have a different perspective. So when you look at it, there's actually 7 different perspectives that you could take when you draw out these 3 circles, depending on where you sit. So it's really interesting, because that's the first thing that we look at, and we map out all the players, because depending on who you talk to, they're going to come at it from a different angle.
So that's really fascinating. So obviously every family business has got, its own unique set of issues. And particularly with all of those, as you say, all those perspectives, every one of them would be slightly different. But I'm wondering, what are the most kind of consistent issues that family businesses face in trying to, maintain and grow their businesses moving forward?
So I think one of the biggest issues is communication. It can also be one of the family's biggest strengths, right? So a lot of times there's a communication breakdown, whether or not they see eye to eye on a certain issue. And it might be that they communicate quite well. It's just perhaps if there's multi-generations in the family, one generation might be holding their voice back because they don't want to offend the other generation. So having a very open communication policy and even a conflict management policy is critical for success in family business. I think another issue is also a little bit around communication, but it's more like I don't want to offend who founded the business. And so therefore, if I have this great idea of where we need to go to next, I don't want to offend the person who came up with the first idea that's made us successful today. So again, having that open door policy of we are free to speak our minds, we are free to offer suggestions and that sort of thing. But those are the things that actually I find early on in business as they're growing through those growing pains that they're like, oh, do we do this? Do we not? Now, I think that COVID, our pandemic that we've just experienced, has actually enabled family businesses to sort of get past that really fast. If you think of the pivot we had to make in, early of 2020 so quickly, all businesses accelerated their ability to be agile, and family businesses in particular. So I think that we're going to see starting to shore up a little bit. Another challenge is I think the familyness piece. So depending on how tied the family is to their product, their name, their brand in the marketplace, having that familyness component to the business. So, I'm an enterprising family and I have, a manufacturing business and everybody knows me as that. If there was going to be a significant pivot, being the family name with that brand is almost harder then. So it's sort of almost, do you disassociate yourself with your name? No, I can't do that. That's my family name, right? So there's a lot more to think through. And I think that's certainly something that's a unique challenge for families. But it can be seen in regular businesses too, right? With their brand.
So I just can't imagine how, when you first start working, I'm just thinking about, the number of conversations I've had with people, just about family stuff and family challenges, and how, an argument today is not about something that happened today. It's happened before. There's always a level of baggage that gets carried forward, just in intimate personal relationships. And I'm just curious about how often does that become something that you have to try and unpack with a family just to even move forward?
Such a great question. It's like that, we unpack a lot of that. And sometimes it's stuff from 10, 15 years ago. So one of the processes that we work through with a family depending on if they want to go down this path, but I highly recommend it, especially if we're going through a succession plan or a continuity plan to get the business to the next generation or passed on to, a family member of some sort, I call it the discovery process. And we're discovering what are the needs and wants, values, and purpose that everybody has. So again, if you think of that 3-circle model, what are the different perspectives that everyone's coming from, and where do they want to go, to see if it really lines up with the leading generation, next generation. And so through the discovery process, what we find out is that we ask every family member individually, and all of this information remains confidential. It obviously sits with us, and then we theme it, but we ask, so let's say I'm working with a family that's either a 5-member family, or we could work with a family that's a 40-member family.
Wow.
I ask everybody, we're getting into those generations where we're at cousins that are running businesses. So that's a lot of discovery interviews that we need to do. But what we do is we try to figure out, is there a theme here, an underlying theme? But we also get some of do I say dirt? I don't know. We get some of the issues, the real underlying issues, and we try to bring that to the surface in a way that isn't attributable to any one person so that we can solve for it. Now, what happens is when we get to the family meeting, where we're talking about these themes, sometimes people will just say, you know what, that was me. I'm totally open now to say that was me that said that. And here's what I actually mean. And that's when we can facilitate that dialogue within the family so that they can table these discussions in an open, transparent, moderated session. And it's very important that it's not at their kitchen table and it's not at their boardroom table, but that we take them into an independent environment. So that everyone feels safe, that it's not like I'm sitting in mom and dad's living room having this conversation. So if it's in, say, our boardroom, it's a neutral territory. And we're there to help facilitate this conversation, bring forward these issues or underlying nuggets that maybe others weren't aware of to help them get to a positive path forward. And they're not always, negative issues, oftentimes very positive, but someone doesn't want to voice it because they're afraid that they're only one voice out of a number of members.
Oh my gosh, it must be. I mean, I'm assuming this to be the case, but there's a natural hierarchy in families, often defined certainly by age. I'm the youngest, in my family, and my family calls me Robbie still. I'm in my 50s. They still call me what they called me when I was 4 years old. So there's a natural hierarchy that exists in families, and I just wonder, how much of that issue comes to the surface within a business? That sometimes you'll have people that within the family are hierarchically at a different level than in the business.
So you're right. I think the hierarchy in family businesses makes an impact to decision making. There's definitely seniority at play when you're around the business boardroom table and talking through some of the issues. We're seeing, this is the first time in really history that we're seeing as many generations in the workforce as there are now, right? We've got the leading generation staying in the business much longer than they ever have. Just, age of life is at a higher number than what it used to be. And then we've got early generations, like the younger generations, getting in. And so if you think of even just how we define our generations, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, we've got, your baby boomers also in there. They're all very different, right? Especially given the speed of which technology has disrupted each of those generations.
Right.
So there's this hierarchy that's at play, but then there's this disruption of technology that's also at play. And then typically, not always, but typically the younger generations are much more astute to understanding the technology, what is sitting there on our devices and what can help enable business. And sometimes the leading generation's kind of like, I don't understand. And so there could be that could cause some of that communication breakdown that I was talking about. Now, savvy business owners are going to know, we hire, if you're not a family business, or if you are, you're hiring people that are smarter than you. That's always a smart business practice, right? That's how you make, so that you can work sort of on the business, not in the business, and let other people work in the business and let other people sort of help surface some strategic items too. So I think if you put your egos aside on the hierarchy, it all works really well. Just sometimes that's much easier said than done.
Right. Interesting. So when you are first become involved with a family business, is it typically just a general kind of strategic role, or is it about actually transitioning from generation to generation? What's the typical scenario? Are you brought in as a strategist who's just sensitive to family businesses, or does there tend to be kind of a specific reason why family businesses engage somebody in your position?
Yeah. So, I guess if I take our firm's view, so people, when they engage us at PwC, if they're a family business, it's going to be at multiple different stages of where they might be in their plan, right? It could be right when they start. And it might be, we're coming to PwC because we want structuring advice. How do we best set up our business structurally so that we have, it's tax effective or efficient, that we're not necessarily paying the most amount of tax, but that we're being efficient with the taxes that we do pay, and that we do pay our fair share of tax, because that's important in today's economy, and especially with ESG and measurements of that. So fair share of tax efficiency, more structuring, typically early on when the businesses are just being established is when they would come to us. And then I think of transactions as typically when they come back to choose a service provider like a PwC or like myself. They might come at a time where there's an illness or another life event. It could be a death in the family. It could be the pandemic made a lot of people think very hard about, one, should I be in this business long term? Is it right for me? Is it ready for the next generation? Should I try to diversify? Heck, should I acquire businesses to make myself stronger? So, big inflection points is often where they reach out to a consultant or a strategist or a business advisor such as us. And then what we do at PwC is, no matter where you are when you come to us, is we take this 50,000 foot view of, we call it the owner's agenda. We take the owner's view on their business. We make sure that their values and purpose, we understand that, and that we understand how it plays into the business and how does it help form the agenda? What is most pressing on your mind? And so depending where that conversation goes is how we will then engage with the business. Is it more on the above the house? So I'm looking at transferring my shares. I'm looking at restructuring my organization. I'm looking at tax efficiency, a sale, et cetera, like something that happens above. Or is it something in the business? Fundamentally, I'm stuck. My costs are rising. My revenue is not increasing. I don't know what to do. So we can come in and help more on the value creation piece. How do you keep your costs down, your revenues up? Is there a separate business stream? That sort of thing. But the fundamental difference working with a firm like ours, where we work with family businesses and understand family businesses, is we overlens that family business dynamic. And then we have specialists that can work within the family specifically if there's stuff to uncover, the discovery process I talked about.
Right. I mean, really, the only fundamental difference between a family business and any other business is it's the family, right? So, it strikes me that you would, what you do would play such a pivotal role in navigating the unique complexity of a business like that. Just like any business, whether it's transnational or whatever it happens to do, there's always a unique set of circumstances. In this case, the most fundamental is the fact it's a family business. Fascinating that.
Yeah.
So what are we've talked about or sort of hinted at some of the challenges the family business has, and I'd love to talk more about that issue, like between one generation and next, but. Without getting into it, I don't want you to kind of paint generations in a negative light. But I'm curious, if we leave that aside, what are the strengths that a family business has over businesses that aren't a family business?
Yeah, so very interesting. So what I described as maybe one of the biggest challenges can also be seen as the biggest strength of a family. So that's that familyness advantage. The fact that they're family and they're already connected. Sometimes speed to decision making is super quick. Now, private businesses in general make much faster decisions because they're governed in a different way than, say, our publicly listed entities in Canada. However, families can bring that, we're on the same page, all right, let's go. Kind of, that's the discussion point. That's the conversation perhaps. And so there's that speed to pivot and that speed to get going on change, making decisions. You think through the pandemic, there's so many things that we had to do so quickly. Families and family businesses, they had that advantage of like making a change and a call, get all the employees at home. We need to get all of their computers there. We need to work effectively. But the other piece is that there's that the element of caring, and the familyness ripples through their businesses. So they treat almost all employees like family. And I'm not saying that other businesses don't.
Oh, interesting.
But this familyness advantage, it's like I work for a family business. A lot of times you feel that it's in their culture, it's in their DNA. And right. So oftentimes people that work for a family business feel like they're part of the family. Now, it depends on the size of the business. Obviously, the larger the business, the harder it is to maintain that. But that's certainly definitely one of the strengths that family businesses have, is that family advantage that feels all the way through. It's part of their culture, part of their fabric. Wow. I think another big strength is the connection to community and the connection to Canada. Like the legacy of their business is impacting our economy. in a positive way. And that's something to be very proud of. And so proud business owners are typically happy to share. And so there's great stories, and those stories help inspire others to start business, just like we're having these conversations today, to help inspire businesses to band together and to start something really cool. And there's that entrepreneurship, right? Even if you're not involved in your family business, your family members, if you think of even my upbringing, and there's so many others like me that grew up in a business that had family business, it just breeds entrepreneurship. So whether or not you end up in that business or you start your own or you understand business in general, it helps the economy flourish because there's more people thinking about how do we help solve for some of those important issues that we have in our world.
I'm with you, sister. I completely agree. I mean, I'm so passionate about entrepreneurship because of its transformative potential within lives and communities. And I love that part of it. And I think, when you broach the subject of COVID earlier, I thought one of the things that struck me is that, we were then reminded about how we have to come together, how in some cases even circle the wagons. And in the family context, that inclination is greater than I would think in most situations. And I think, that's powerful. But I would also think it's potentially daunting for people working in businesses that aren't in the family. So what are do you ever have to work with family businesses to just open them up to the idea of having non-family members take a leadership role in the companies?
I think it's a bit of an evolution anyways. Like a lot of family businesses will get there on their own without us needing to steer them to the idea of having professional managers. However, sometimes professional managers in a family business gets you to your outcome much faster because they're there to do the job versus take care of everything else. Often the family members have been there since the inception. They sort of dabble with all sorts of different parts of the business. So often the coaching might come in the form of keep working on your business versus in your business and let other people come in and work in the business. Make sure there's great relationships with those people so that you understand what's happening, that there's open communication streams and that sort of thing. So there's professional managers. There's also the idea in family businesses, like sometimes a family employment policy, like when are we going to bring family members in to the business is critical because especially as we're seeing now, we're entering an era where we're starting to see a lot more third generation businesses in Canada. And of course, there's some that are fourth and fifth gen. Oh. And across the world, there's some that are many more generations deep. But in Canada, largely, we're moving from second gen to third gen in a lot of cases now, or the first time where we're seeing more of that. And so that generation, you're now at the cousin side, the cousin consortium can become very large, right? So if you think of it, you start with one or two people. The next is like the sibling, that's generation 2, generation 3 end up at cousins. And so like once the cousins kids start having a need to or want to come into the family business, or even when the cousins want to come into the family business, it's what is the family employment policy to allow when that child or that person is allowed to come in, and in what capacity does everyone start? And every family business is different, but we can help based on, purpose, values, and the culture that they're looking for, help them with that policy to say, does every family member have to work in the family business for an X number of time? Do they have to work in another business for X period of time before coming to the family business? And that we're starting to see more and more of to get diverse experience. There's such a beauty in diversity of thought. And if you're always together and this whole familyness advantage comes back to like that maybe disadvantage when you've got less diversity of thought, if you've got family members that have worked somewhere else first, that often just brings a different insight into the business. It also helps bring or at least stop maybe the nepotism of I'm deserving of just working directly into the family business. And so you earn your right into the family business by demonstrating your ability to work outside of the family business. And then it's sort of, where do you earn your stripes within the business? And some families have their next gen do a rotational program through various departments. And those rotational programs might be a year for 5 years in 5 different departments. It might be 2 months for 5 different departments. So, every family has an appetite of different speeds to which they need the next gen or family members to come in. And the other area that's interesting is that not all family members are cut out for the family business.
Right.
And so what does that mean when the leading generation's trying to divide, maybe the shares or that company into the future? So there's so much at play with a family dynamic within family business. It keeps me really excited and engaged about my job because it's always different. And that's why, as entrepreneurial as I am, I actually prefer helping other families on their journey than just working within my own.
One of the things that a big part of the focus of this series is on the human aspects of business. Because first of all, I'm struck by how much oxygen in the room is taken up by tech businesses and how much business reporting is simply about the scorecard or the mechanics of the business. Whereas what I've always found is the difference is the human element. It's not discussed enough. And one of the things that, it's interesting to talk to people that aren't necessarily in business. There's a negative opinion many people have of business, and I think that it's an opinion that's been formed because of the behavior of certain large companies. And I think what's really missed is that most businesses are relatively small. In fact, they're tiny in most cases, and how much is invested in them. That these are not titans of industry, these are human beings. And my experience has been many of the people that you describe working with are people that are deeply committed to trying to do the right thing by themselves, by their customers, by their communities. It's really, I think it's misunderstood. And I think speaking to you about family businesses, it just reinforces the point that that at the end of the day, it is ultimately all about people. And I think it's amazing the work that you must come across and the work that you do for these companies. So my final question is, if you were to give 3 pieces of advice to family businesses on how to maintain health, what would your advice be?
So 3 pieces of advice to family businesses to maintain health.
Yeah.
I think the first one is to have an open communication plan. Okay, maybe I don't do these in order because I actually think settling on your purpose and values is the most important thing. That one's probably first. And then there's a communication plan that needs to happen so that how are we going to go through agreements, disagreements? How are we going to go through if I've got a point where I'm not sure how you're going to take it? It doesn't mean I think there's going to be conflict, but how do I bring that up? I think that's important. Communication is key for longevity. And I think there needs to be just that governance model in general in terms of how do family members come in and out of the business? I think that's key when we're dealing with family businesses. Right. Purpose and values is key for any business. Yeah. But definitely the communication plan, key for all businesses, including family businesses. And the family employment policy is critical, especially when you think of how future generations are going to come into the business.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. And as you say, well, those 3 points I can see being absolutely vital. It's really the third one that's the most pertinent to family business because the other 2 are, you're right, they apply to any business, but that third one, okay, how do we bring people within the family into the business and make sure all expectations are on the table up front? It's so key, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I could go on. I can make a list of 10 if you really wanted to, but how I started was around structuring. Yeah. Okay. So when I started working with family businesses, my specialty was really around structuring, which I still do, but it's around getting the right structure from the beginning. Right now, it's sort of like the old adage of when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, maybe 20 years ago was the best time, but when's the next best time? Well, today. So if you're not planned properly now, it's fine. We can still get you there now. It's always best to look at that when you start. A lot of times businesses and family businesses, when they start, they've got a purpose. They want to solve a problem. So they start their business and they think about the structure, the tax and the the elements of structure last, and that's fine because they're the entrepreneurial. They're looking and focused on their business and how do I grow that. So I think that's a key component. I think also understanding your competitive landscape vis-a-vis what does the future hold, and I think this is more critical now than ever before because there's such consolidation in the markets right now. Is understanding who is looking to buy you, who could you look to buy to make yourself stronger, or alliances, right? So are there joint business ventures that you can take in and take out? And that's critical for all businesses, but I think families need to be thinking about that too, because even though they have a legacy that they want to uphold, sometimes diversifying or diversifying their portfolio, or even taking a piece and divesting a portion of it might actually be overall better for their trajectory based on, what need they're trying to solve.
Right. Amazing. Any other advice?
I think I should stop there.
Well, that is super helpful. Gosh, I could talk to you about this all day long because to me, I love business in all of its shapes and forms, but I think that there's probably no more interestingly complex business than a family business. So I just want to say thank you so much. I can imagine you'd be a phenomenal advisor to business. So I'm telling I've got 3 daughters, 8, 10, and 16. I've already told them they're all coming to work for me eventually. So as soon as that happens, I'll be bringing you in to give us some advice.
Remember, purpose and values, your communications plan, and your family employment policy. And should I call you Robbie? Is that what I heard, Robbie?
That's got to be cleared right up front. Yeah, for sure. All right, Sabrina.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks so much for sticking to the end of our interview with Sabrina Fitzgerald, Family Enterprise Advisor at PwC in Canada. There's a point at which a business moves from high risk to something more stable. And for many owners, the possibility of their company becoming a legacy for their families becomes something real. I was fascinated to discuss the unique aspect of those businesses with Sabrina, and I hope you enjoyed the interview. And if you did enjoy this interview, please hit like and subscribe to hear more inspired stories from the world's great entrepreneurs.